We live in an age where the fabric of our existence has become dangerously thin, a collection of frayed warp threads that we spend our entire lives frantically attempting to weave into a coherent pattern, only to watch the design unravel before our very eyes. If we pause for a moment to truly observe the quality of our present awareness, we might notice the faint, frantic rhythm of a life lived at 1,000 different intersections, a state of being where our attention is not a steady, focused beam, but a broken signal scattering in a dozen directions at once. We inhabit a modern existence that feels less like a singular, purposeful journey and more like a high-speed assembly line of unfinished fragments, where the completion of one task is immediately eclipsed by the demand of 3 others. The air around us carries the weight of 1,000 silent pings, a pervasive, low-frequency hum of digital anticipation that keeps our nervous systems in a state of superficial, high-speed output, forcing our minds to toggle between tabs, screens, and identities until we no longer know which thread belongs to our own true soul. We are the architects of this fragmentation, believing with every fiber of our being that if we just move fast enough, if we just multitask with enough intensity, we can finally weave a life that feels whole and meaningful. We do not realize that we have become the frayed edges of our own design, catching nothing but the remnants of our own spent energy, while the actual vibrant world continues to move and breathe completely outside the parameters of our tangled loom. This state of constant, automated scattering is the hallmark of our modern life, a pervasive dissonance where we live as if our worth is measured by the sheer volume of our uncompleted connections. We walk through our mornings, our work hours, and our quiet evening hours in a state of high alert, using the myth of the successful multitasker as our primary navigation tool. If the email is left unanswered, then we have failed. If the project is not updated, then we are falling behind. If our focus wanders for even a single second, then we are losing our grip on our own success. We spend our finite, precious life force reinforcing the warp of this intricate, chaotic tapestry, adding knot upon knot, believing that the structural complexity of our busyness is the same thing as the structural integrity of our character. We do not realize that we have become the casualties of our own ambitions, catching nothing but the debris of our own disconnected impulses, while the deep, resonant rhythm of our actual life continues to pulse in the quiet spaces between our task spaces we have systematically hollowed out and filled with noise. The physical toll of this self-imposed dispersal is written plainly into our frames, a cartography of chronic disconnection that we have come to accept as our normal human condition. If we pause now and conduct a gentle, internal survey of our body, we can map the specific anatomy of our frayed warp threads. Observe the neck tension that has become our constant companion, that rigid, crane-like forward lean where the cervical spine meets the shoulders, as if we are permanently reaching out toward a future task that never actually arrives. This is where we hold the weight of our project manager persona, the part of us that believes it is our singular responsibility to hold all the strings at once. Because these muscles are held in a state of permanent, agonizing contraction, the blood flow to the crown of our head feels restricted, creating a dull, radiating pressure behind our eyes and a sense of mental claustrophobia that makes it impossible to think with any expansive clarity. Our shoulders are not resting, they are hovering, permanently elevated toward our ears, creating a stiff, unnatural rigidness that traps the breath in the upper chest. This is the physiological stance of the frantic weaver, never the stance of a human being at rest. As we move our awareness down, we can feel the chronic, shallow hitch in our breathing, that tiny, involuntary pause we make every time we switch windows on our screen or transition from one meeting to the next. This breath-holding is the silent symptom of our fragmentation. It is the body's way of saying that it cannot handle the pace, and so it simply shuts down its access to the deep, grounding oxygen that sustains our spirit. We have traded the belly's deep, rhythmic wisdom for the chest's frantic, short-term survival tactics. We have become experts at the fidgeting habit, that restless, constant movement of our fingers, our feet, or our pensa nervous system trying to release a buildup of kinetic energy that has no place to go because we are never truly here in any single action. We are exhausted, not by the tasks themselves, but by the sheer biological cost of sustaining this state of internal disconnection every single waking second of our lives. We have become ghosts in our own homes, floating above our physical vessels, too scattered to occupy the space of our own lives. We are, in effect, the masters of an intricate, chaotic illusion, believing that we are the weaver who creates, when in reality we are the threads that are being pulled apart until we are little more than loose, unattached fibers. We look at our complex, busy, fragmented lives, and we mistake this level of activity for substance, as if the more unfinished threads we have hanging in the air, the more significant our existence must be. We are haunted by the fear of being slow or unfocused or behind, and we have decided, with a cold, hardened resolve, that we will never let that happen. We have built an entire life out of productivity, and in the process, we have completely forgotten how to be. We are so busy trying to manage the loom that we have stopped noticing the tapestry itself. We have become so addicted to the pace of our own output that the absolute beauty of a singular, focused moment feels suspicious, or even dangerous. When a moment of genuine stillness arrives, when the screens are dimmed, when the notifications stop, when the mind finally slows down, we do not relax, we panic. We instinctively reach for a new thread to pull, a new project to start, a new notification to check, because the absence of the chaos feels like the absence of our own relevance. This is the great, quiet tragedy of our modern experience. We are using our most advanced cognitive capacity to weave a prison of our own manufacture, and we are paying for the privilege with the total degradation of our nervous systems. We are caught in a cycle where we treat the potential for future progress as an absolute current reality, and we sacrifice our present wholeness to secure a future that never truly arrives. We are suffering from the exhaustion of things that haven't been completed, and we are letting those fragments occupy the seat of our soul. The loom is elegant. Yes, it shows a profound capacity for detail, for planning, for intention, but it is a misplaced capacity. We are misdirecting our immense creative intelligence toward the construction of knots, instead of the cultivation of a cohesive whole. If we could only pause, if we could only feel the profound physical ache of this frayed existence, we might begin to understand that we are not the loom, and we are not the tangled warp threads. We are the weaver, and we are the vast, open space in which the weaving happens. And we are always capable of stopping, of stepping back, and of finally choosing to weave with a single, clear and intentional thread. We stand together at the threshold of this realization, feeling the heavy, familiar weight of our own knots and the sudden, flickering light of a new possibility. The silence of this room is not empty. It is a profound, waiting presence. It is the space that remains when the multitasking stops, when the frantic switching ends, and when the gaze finally stops scanning for the next distraction. We are being asked to witness the absolute futility of our fragmentation, to see the sheer, exhausting volume of energy we have squandered on the maintenance of a disconnected life. We are finally ready to look at our own hands, the hands that have been weaving these frayed threads for so long, and to realize that they are perfectly capable of stopping. They are capable of letting go. We are ready to move past the exhausting performance of our scattered selves, to leave the battlefield of our unfinished tasks, and to step directly into the physical reality of our own reclamation, discovering how to gather the threads and reclaim the vast, unified space of our own sovereign existence, where the only thing that is truly real is the immediate, unscripted breath rising and falling within the stillness of a single, focused heart. To understand how we became so profoundly entangled in this web of fragmented existence, we must observe the living, breathing laboratory of our daily interactions through the lens of the archetype we embody. Consider the modern professional, the parent or the creator, the virtual collector whose entire life is governed by a subconscious belief that if they can only manage a dozen lenses at once, they will finally be immune to the sting of insignificance. This person operates with an efficiency that is both admired and devastatingly expensive to their own sense of self. They are the ones who pride themselves on being able to hold 3 conversations while simultaneously recording the visual evidence of their own experience, the ones who eat their lunch while editing the image of that lunch, the ones who feel an acute, agonizing guilt whenever they sit down to just eat without a digital witness. They appear to be in command of their environment. But if we look beneath the polished, aesthetic exterior, we find a biological system running on a perpetual state of high-frequency cognitive alarm. Their life is defined by the effort required to prevent any moment from passing unrecorded, and because they view an unrecorded experience as a failed opportunity, they have built their identity around the act of perpetual documentation. They do not know how to exist without a frame to fill, a subject to capture, or a social feed to patch over. The somatic toll of this relentless observational stance is profound, embedding itself into the very structure of their physical form, like a permanent sculpture of tension. If we examine the precise geometry of their distress, we see a body that has effectively become its own gallery cage. The ocular muscles, that delicate bridge between the thinking mind and the feeling world, are locked into a permanent, iron-like contraction. This is the anatomical signature of the collector, who is constantly scanning forward, reaching toward the next angle, the next lighting shift, the next fragment of beauty to be preserved. In the modern virtual collector, this physical posture has become a chronic state. They are literally holding their head in a position of permanent observation, preventing the neck from ever truly lengthening or the jaw from ever truly dropping into a state of ease. This muscular lock creates a physical barrier to the flow of blood and neural signals to the brain, manifesting as a persistent, low-grade brain fog and a sensation of mental claustrophobia that makes the world feel distant and ungraspable. They are present in the room, but their consciousness is tethered to a dozen different digital nodes, leaving the body a hollowed-out shell, an empty tripod for a camera that is always turned away from the owner. Further down the frame, we can observe the nervous habit of the breath hold. If you watch the collector, you will see it happen every time they compose a shot, every time they switch from the physical world to the screen interface, every time they are interrupted by the sudden ping of engagement. They catch their breath, holding it in a tight, shallow pocket at the top of the lungs, effectively severing the connection to the belly's deep, rhythmic stability. This is the physiological stance of someone who is permanently waiting for the next strike of visual validation, a body that has forgotten that it is allowed to breathe freely in the presence of beauty. Because the diaphragm is never allowed to fully release, the ribcage remains rigid, creating a permanent, dull ache that migrates across the upper back, turning every inhale into a mechanical struggle rather than an act of nourishment. The lungs, intended to expand into the vast open space of the torso, are instead forced to move within a restricted, rigid cage. They can only take short, shallow sips of air, which reinforces the brain's perception that the environment is unstable, because our breathing patterns are the most direct signal we send to the nervous system regarding our internal state. When we breathe shallowly, we are essentially whispering to the brain that we are in danger, and the brain complies by flooding the bloodstream with the chemistry of fragmented urgency. The intestinal bracing, too, tells a story of profound disconnection. The gut is the body's second brain, a center of intuitive wisdom and deep, calm digestion. In the virtual collector, this area is hard, concave, and tense, a physiological keep-out sign. By hardening the gut, they effectively shut down the restorative processes of the body to prioritize the distribution of energy to the flickering, reactive mind. They are essentially starving their own inner garden to build a thicker, faster archive, sacrificing their capacity for deep rest to feed the insatiable hunger of the image count. And we must not overlook the fidgeting hands. The hands are the primary instruments of the participant, but in our modern state, they are in constant, frantic, non-purposeful motions, wiping on glass, tapping on sensors, adjusting the focus. This is not mere habit, it is a desperate attempt to release the buildup of kinetic energy that has no place to go, because the mind is never truly here in any single action. The hands are trying to find something solid to hold on to in a sea of simulations, but they are only ever catching light. The psychology of this trapped architecture is rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of the human brain's capacity to create meaning through documentation. We are operating under the deluded belief that if we simply archive enough evidence, we can finally create a museum strong enough to support the weight of our own existence. We believe that recording is a functional tool, that by capturing the sunset, we are becoming the sunset. But this is the ultimate behavioral error. Documentation is not an act of participation, it is a mental rehearsal of absence that physically depletes the organism. It is a form of cognitive shadowboxing. The more we lean into the desire to document everything, the more we atrophy our capacity to inhabit the one thing that is currently in front of us. We become so consumed by the imaginary construction of our digital gallery that we lose the actual, tangible ability to inhabit the present moment with spontaneity, clarity, and depth. We are essentially living in a simulation, and the reality of the present, the sun on our skin, the breath in our chest, the opportunity for genuine, unhurried connection passes us by, unappreciated and ignored, because our attention is entirely consumed by the invisible, projected image we are fighting to complete in the dark. This behavior creates a profound sense of identity dysmorphia. We stop seeing ourselves as living beings and start seeing ourselves as managers of a permanent output crisis. When we sit down to experience a meal, we are not tasting, we are defending our position against the tide of incoming impressions. When we interact with our loved ones, we are not connecting, we are monitoring the light to ensure we haven't lost time for the next capture. We are terrified of the vulnerability of being unrecorded, because to be is to be slow, and to be slow is to be vulnerable to the passage of time. And for the virtual collector, the passage of time is synonymous with loss. We are locked in a cage of our own archiving, looking out at the world through the narrow iron bars of our framed logic. We fail to realize that the very tools we have developed to keep us remembered are the tools that are currently preventing us from being lived. We have built a gallery so thick with defensive, staged patterns that there is no space for us to actually move inside of it. We are the collector, the image, and the empty frame all at once. And the tragedy is that we don't realize the experience was never meant to be owned. We have just been holding our breath in front of the world for so long that we have forgotten how to reach out and stop the flash. The cumulative effect of this state is a total loss of sovereign presence. We are never fully where we are because our awareness is always hovering in the next frame, checking the integrity of our digital flair. This constant displacement from the present is what the great traditions describe as the source of our deepest existential friction. We are like a traveler who spends their entire journey staring at the camera lens, checking it against every mistake, worrying about the lighting, and calculating the angle of the shot, only to arrive at the destination having never once looked out the window to see the landscape. The landscapey beauty of our life, the warmth of our connections, the deep satisfaction of a single intentional action is all in the present moment, but we are too busy checking our virtual storage to see it. We are exhausted, we are brittle, and we are missing our lives. And yet, this is not an irreversible state. The very fact that we can observe these tensions, that we can feel the tightness in the neck, the shallow breath, the restless hands is the first crucial step toward liberation. The moment we recognize the architecture of our own simulation trap is the moment the machine begins to lose its absolute authority over our existence, paving the way for us to stop the recording, take a breath, and finally, truly begin to participate with a single, clear and intentional hand. We carry the weight of these frayed, scattered threads into the very heart of our existence, watching our vitality unravel under the relentless demand of our own fragmented designs. Yet a profound, visceral shift begins to unfold within the silent theater of our shared consciousness. To completely unweave the chaos of our multitasking addiction, reclaim our natural capacity for deep focus, and escape the exhaustion of our perpetual state of cognitive dispersal, we must hold our immediate experience entirely still under a sharp, uncompromising light of reality. We must look directly past our professional titles, our social notifications, and our digital metrics, and dissect the precise psychological laws that cause us to actively participate in the building of our own fragmentation. When we trace the origins of our deep, background anxiety and our relentless need to juggle a dozen lives at once, we discover that our suffering rarely stems from the objective reality of our workload or the chaotic demands of the modern world, but from an invisible, lightning-fast loop of self-inflicted mental torture that operates beneath our conscious awareness. Thousands of years ago, a profound psychological insight was observed regarding the nature of human pain, teaching us that whenever an unexpected crisis, a professional setback, or a sudden change occurs in our lives, our biological frame is instantly struck by a specific sequence of dual experiences. The first experience is the raw, unedited event, itself an unexpected shift in our environment, a sudden departure from our planned routine, a moment of social rejection, or the simple physical fatigue of a long day of navigating chaos. This initial touch contains no personal failure or inherent malice. It is simply the natural friction of a dynamic, non-linear world, bringing a localized sting, a flash of genuine discomfort, or a moment of authentic confusion that passes through our experience like a sudden cooling rain across an open field. Yet, almost instantaneously, before the echo of that first event has even faded from our nervous system, we pick up a heavy psychological weapon with our own hands and repeatedly drive it deep into our own consciousness. This secondary strike is our elaborate internal commentary, our obsessive overthinking, our toxic self-blame, and our terrified projection of future catastrophes or social ruin. The first event causes a basic, manageable discomfort, but this second strike creates the vast, drowning ocean of our psychological suffering. When a plan fails or a boundary is tested, that is merely the first touch of reality. But when we spend the subsequent hours or days viciously telling ourselves that we are fundamentally flawed, meticulously scripting scenarios of how we might be abandoned, and agonizingly punishing ourselves for being a human being susceptible to change, instead of an omnipotent architect of focus, we are actively delivering the second strike to ourselves. We become both the architect of the trap and the victim of the scattered web, trapped in an exhausting loop of identity warfare. We fail to realize that our systemic burnout does not come from the genuine challenges of living. It comes entirely from the immense volume of secondary editing, performance anxiety, and task management we choose to inflict upon our own minds. We are not suffocating because the world is dangerous. We are suffocating because we are trying to force a wild, living presence to exist within the rigid, unyielding parameters of our own terrified productivity. If we trace the trajectory of this secondary psychological weapon to its ultimate point of origin, we inevitably discover that our entire modern cage of anxiety and control addiction is anchored to a single foundational illusion, the myth of a permanent isolated self that must be protected at all costs. We operate under the unconscious, unquestioned assumption that there is a solid, unchanging entity called my focus, my reputation, my control, or my identity, sitting at the very center of our lives. We treat this fabricated persona like a fragile, precious tapestry, believing that if we show an unedited vulnerability, allow our focus to be breached, or stop juggling a dozen threads at once, this tapestry will collapse and we will cease to exist or matter to the world. This is why our modern decision fatigue and constant multitasking feel so terrifyingly existential, and why choosing to release the fragmented threads feels like a matter of absolute survival. We are not just navigating ordinary life, we are carrying the immense, exhausting burden of believing that we must permanently manufacture and defend a static ego construct. We forget that this rigid, protective identity we are destroying our physical biology to sustain is not a permanent monument, it is a conceptual ghost, a fluid, ever-changing mosaic of temporary thoughts, professional roles, social agreements, and passing mental states that has no fixed core. By treating this ghost as a permanent reality that must be constantly fortified through high-speed distraction, we doom ourselves to a lifetime of defensive warfare against the very nature of existence. To completely break the power of this illusion, we must open our eyes to the overarching, liberating truth of absolute impermanence, realizing that the very nature of reality is not a static ledger to be managed, but an unceasing, fluid tapestry that weaves itself anew with every passing microsecond. Every atom in our physical vessel is in a state of continuous, ecstatic exchange with the living world around us. The cells of our heart, our skin, and our lungs are constantly dying and being reborn, and the very breath we draw in right now was once the breath of ancient oceans and distant forests. Our productivity, our social status, our achievements, and our most intense anxieties are not solid anchors in our consciousness. They are ephemeral currents of energy, rising from nothingness, dancing for a brief moment in our awareness, and dissolving back into the silence from which they came. When we understand this deeply, the frantic, white-knuckled need to control every thread of our future completely evaporates. We realize that a sudden loss of focus, a breakdown in our tasks, or a shifting social dynamic is not a permanent stain on an unchanging identity, but simply a single temporary wave passing through a changing sea. There is no permanent weaver to be ruined by an ordinary change, and there is no static future to be permanently secured by an endless thickening of our workload. The landscape of tomorrow is written entirely in water, and our attempts to carve our certainty into it with the dull knife of constant management is a form of madness that only ensures our present misery. Let us look closely at the true nature of this mental grip we hold so tightly. For we often confuse our chronic multitasking with dedication, foresight, or wisdom. In the quiet corridors of our minds, we tell ourselves that our intense worry over our unfinished tasks is a reflection of our commitment to our goals, or that our frantic switching between screens is a sign of our personal optimization. But under the clinical, compassionate gaze of raw awareness, we see that this grip is not driven by love, responsibility, or true wisdom. It is driven by a deep, terrifying undercurrent of resistance to the natural, changing flow of life. It is a tight, white-knuckled grasp on a highly specific, idealized projection of how our lives must look in order for us to feel allowed to breathe. We are holding our breath, demanding that the natural atmosphere of reality stop moving so that we never have to face the vulnerability of being seen as simply human, open, and unfragmented. This attachment to constant output is a form of spiritual stagnation, a rigid refusal to allow our lives to unfold in their own majestic, unpredictable, and often seasonal timing. When we demand that our existence follow a perfectly managed, static script, we are suffocating the very life force out of our existence. We are trying to preserve a living forest. By turning it into a hyper-efficient stone factory, we may generate a predictable, controlled environment, but we ensure that the living ecosystem of our humanity is permanently reduced to a wasteland of grey, suffocating silence. The moment we fully comprehend the absolute futility of this resistance, a profound structural shift begins to occur within the depths of our consciousness. We begin to see that our overthinking, switching, and planning mind is like a small, frantic creature barking at a passing thunderstorm, completely convinced that its noise is what keeps the sky from destroying the house. The storm of life moves according to vast, natural systemic movements that have absolutely nothing to do with our intellectual anxieties, our checklists, or our task lists. When we realize this, we can finally experience a deep, systemic drop in our internal electrical voltage. We can look at our unfinished tasks, our real human limitations, and our completely unscripted moments. And we can look at the wild uncertainty of our modern society, and we can choose to lower our weapons. We can step out of the war room of our comparative intellect and stand nakedly in the open field of immediate, unadorned reality. We can feel the precise millisecond the mind tries to pick up that second weapon of self-judgment, and with a soft, spacious breath, we can simply choose to let it drop to the floor. We no longer need to look at our human lives as a commercial or social product to be optimized and defended, but as an incredible unfolding mystery to be lived, trusted, and experienced through the intelligence of an open, undefended heart. This drop in voltage allows us to notice the immediate space around us with an entirely fresh quality of perception, recognizing that the prison of the loom only exists as long as we continue to tighten the wires and add new knots under forced pressure. The moment we refuse to give our finite attention to the phantom threats of our future, the threads lose their locking power over our biological systems. We can feel our chest wall expanding with a new, raw permission to breathe, realizing that our value was never something that could be captured by our ability to keep the world under control. Our true value is the very field of awareness in which these passing symbols and seasonal cycles occur, an unclassifiable, boundless depth that remains completely untouched by whether we are productive or whether the world is in chaos. We are ready to move past the exhausting defense of an idealized weaver persona, to leave the battlefield of our anticipations behind, and to step directly into the practical architecture of our own somatic reclamation, discovering how to anchor our wild, wandering minds into the solid, unembellished sanctuary of the physical present. We stand together at this precipice of transformation, feeling the raw, unfiltered weight of our own past fragmentation beginning to lose its density as we commit to the architecture of our own reclamation. Having recognized the frantic, scattered nature of our internal weaver and the physical toll exacted by our relentless need to manage a dozen threads at once, we are now tasked with the most vital labor of all, the practical, disciplined restructuring of our own consciousness. This is not a task for the faint of heart or for the mind that seeks a sudden, magical escape from the reality of human existence. It is a slow, methodical, and deeply grounded practice of returning our awareness to the physical vessel, time and time again, until the body itself becomes the reliable anchor that prevents us from being swept away by the winds of our own distraction. We must learn to become the masters of our own attention, cultivating a presence that is not a fleeting state of mind, but a resilient, physical capability. The practice begins in the quiet, unglamorous moments of the day, when we are most tempted to reach for the familiar stimulation of our fragmented habits. Whenever we notice the mind beginning to sprint forward, whenever we feel the sudden, sharp constriction of the throat as we anticipate a new demand, or whenever we catch ourselves hovering in that restless, shallow space of being halfway in and halfway out of our own lives, we must immediately execute a somatic anchor. We do not try to suppress the thought or judge ourselves for the distraction. We simply bring the full weight of our attention down, past the frantic chatter of the intellect, and seat it firmly into the base of the torso, into the deep, quiet center of our physical gravity. We feel the dense, real pressure of our body against the support of the chair or the floor, noticing the precise sensation of our skin meeting the environment. We take a slow, continuous breath, driving the air not into the tight, defensive upper chest, but into the deep, expanding and softening bowl of the lower abdomen. This is the foundational movement of synthesis. As the belly expands, we are physically signaling to the nervous system that the urgency is an illusion, that the ground is solid, and that we are safe to reside within the boundaries of our own skin. We consciously scan the architecture of our tension. We soften the jaw, creating a deliberate pocket of space between the teeth, letting the tongue rest heavy and inert on the floor of the oral cavity. We let the shoulders slide away from the ears. Feeling the trapezius muscles release their long, weary hold, we unclench the fingers, letting them go soft and open. This is not a passive exercise, it is an act of fierce, disciplined sovereignty. By repeatedly choosing to settle the body, we are training the brain to recognize that it does not need to be everywhere at once. We are building the neural circuitry of focus, one breath at a time, proving to our own biology that we possess the capacity to be still and complete, even in the middle of a world that demands we be scattered. Once we have anchored ourselves, we must then turn our attention to the visual field, for the eyes are the primary conductors of our fragmentation. We have spent years treating our visual experience as a rapid-fire radar system, scanning for the next thing to fix, the next thread to adjust, the next threat to neutralize. To reclaim the depth of our presence, we practice the art of the peripheral soft gaze. Without moving our heads, we allow the boundaries of our vision to expand, moving from a narrow focused point to an inclusive, spacious field. We take in the textures, the light, the subtle shifts of color in the space around us, allowing the eyes to rest in a soft, non-judgmental reception of the world as it is. This is a profound neurological reset. By softening the focus, we tell the survival brain that it does not need to be in a state of high alert search, and we allow the mind to settle into a wider, more expansive state of awareness. We are learning to see the world as a whole, rather than as a collection of disjointed pieces to be managed, and in doing so, we begin to reflect that same wholeness within our own inner landscape. As we stabilize this open gaze, we then apply the cognitive discipline of bare observation to the thoughts that inevitably continue to arise. We no longer treat our thoughts as urgent directives to be followed or as fundamental truths to be defended. We treat them as what they are: passing phenomena, temporary ripples on the surface of our awareness. When a thought cometh, the thought of an unfinished project, the worry about a social obligation, the judgment about our own pathway, do not engage with the narrative. We simply apply a gentle, structural label to the thought, acknowledging it as planning or worrying or comparing, and then we let it dissolve. This labeling is a powerful tool of synthesis because it separates us from the content of the thought. We are no longer the one who is worried, we are the one who is witnessing the worry. By creating this luminous wedge of space, we strip the thought of its ability to dictate our internal state. We are the sky, and the thoughts are merely the clouds. They may be dark or light, heavy or wispy, but they cannot stain the sky. This discipline becomes our most precious tool as we move through the day, transforming the way we relate to the rhythm of our work and our rest. We commit to the practice of single-threaded living. In every action, no matter how small, we give ourselves fully to the process. When we wash a glass, We wash the glass with our entire being. We feel the temperature of the water, the texture of the soap, the weight of the ceramic in our palms, and the sound of the splash. We do not allow the mind to wander ahead to the next task. This is the practice of synthesis, where we gather the frayed threads of our attention and tie them into a single, strong knot of presence. By doing this, we begin to notice that the satisfaction of life comes not from the volume of what we complete, but from the quality of the presence we bring to each completed moment. We find that when we are fully present, the sense of urgency begins to fade, replaced by a deep, resonant sense of adequacy. We are doing one thing, and that one thing is enough. We are enough. As we deepen this practice, we must also embrace the radical, often terrifying art of the sacred pause. Our modern culture is a machine that runs on the avoidance of silence, and we have become masters of filling every gap with stimulation. We must consciously rebel against this by carving out unnegotiable zones of stillness, where we intentionally leave the threads hanging and sit with the discomfort of our own unfinished nature. In these moments, we do not distract ourselves. We sit with the urge to do more. We sit with the itch to check the screen. We sit with the fear of falling behind, and we allow all of these uncomfortable, frantic sensations to simply pass through us. We learn that we can sit with the discomfort of being incomplete, and that nothing catastrophic happens. We learn that we are not defined by our output, but by the depth of our capacity to be present with whatever is arising in our field of awareness. This is where the true transformation occurs, in the quiet, lonely, beautiful work of staying with ourselves when the machine is turned off. To maintain this discipline, we must cultivate a profound sense of self-compassion, for we will surely slip. We will find ourselves pulled back into the scattering. We will find ourselves lost in the tab switching. We will find ourselves holding our breath and tightening our shoulders. When this happens, we must not let it become the second arrow. We do not punish ourselves for losing our focus. We celebrate the moment we realize we have lost it. The realization itself is the victory. The moment we notice the fragmentation, we are already back in the state of presence. So we simply smile at our own human tendency. We take a deep, grounding breath. We drop our awareness back into the pelvis. We soften the eyes and we begin again. This is the path of the weaver. It is not about reaching a state of perfect permanent focus. It is about the infinite, gentle, and persistent return to the present. Every time we return, we are strengthening the muscle of our awareness, building the capacity to hold our life in a way that is clear, intentional, and whole. We are, in this practice, reclaiming the loom. We are taking the scattered, frayed threads of our modern life, and we are choosing to weave them into a pattern of our own design. We are no longer the victims of the machine. We are the conscious architects of our own internal resonance. We can feel, even now, the shift occurring. The frantic pace is slowing, the noise is settling, and the sense of being all here is growing stronger with every conscious exhale. We are moving toward a state of living that is not defined by how much we finish, but by the clarity, the peace, and the deep, abiding presence we bring to every singular thread of our existence. We are reclaiming our right to a life that feels whole, and we are realizing that this wholeness is not something to be earned through speed or output. It is something that is always available, waiting right beneath the surface of our awareness, accessible the moment we choose to stop, breathe, and gather ourselves home. The loom, once a place of frantic, knotted production, now becomes a simple, quiet space where our intention and our action move in perfect, unhurried synchronicity, reflecting the grace of a soul that has finally learned to reside in the heart of its own stillness. We see that the threads were never the problem, it was our refusal to let them be. And now, in the quiet, we simply let them be. The lingering warmth of that expanding breath stays with us, grounding our weight firmly into the floor beneath our feet. as the complex machinery of our chronic fragmentation and frantic multitasking finally grinds to a complete liberating halt. We can feel a profound change occurring right here in the physical perimeter of our cells, a deep structural softening that signals the arrival of a completely new state of human consciousness. The invisible iron bands that have bound our cervical spine, our tight upper chest, and our restless, scanning eyes for decades seem to melt away, allowing the skull to balance effortlessly atop the spine like a drop of morning dew resting on a lotus leaf. Our chest, once a hot, collapsed fortress of shallow, survival-driven breaths and protective shielding, opens up into a vast windswept valley where the lungs can expand and contract with the ease of cool, slow ocean tides. The tongue remains soft on the floor of the oral cavity, the jaw remains completely loose, and the skin across our forehead becomes as smooth as the surface of a wilderness lake on a windless night. We are no longer a frantic weaver trapped inside a shimmering, fragile loom of our own making. We have stepped out of the architectural trap entirely and are standing under the immense, unblemished dome of an open, natural sky. In this deep clarity, we realize that the mind is not a scatterbrained operator or a task list manager that needs to be constantly monitored, contained, or defended against the possibility of falling behind, but rather a transparent mountain pool that reflects everything while remaining completely untouched by the images passing across its surface. We watch our remaining scattered thoughts arise, glide through our awareness, and dissolve back into nothingness, exactly like white clouds moving across an infinite blue firmament, without leaving a single scar or scratch upon the sky. The frantic need to catch the next notification, the agonizing pressure to force an immediate and defensive display of productivity, and the exhausting compulsion to look for external guarantees of relevance are replaced by a monumental, unshakable self-sovereignty. We feel a profound, inherent safety in the simple fact of our own existence, a realization that we do not need to purchase our belonging or a right to rest through perpetual self-monitoring or aggressive scheduling. The world before us loses its razor-sharp edges of personal threat and environmental instability, transforming instead into a beautiful, shifting landscape of pure potentiality, where every single choice is no longer an existential crisis, but a joyful, creative movement of our native, unfiltered, and perfectly grounded intelligence. This is the great baseline of immanent presence, the sovereign boundary that has always belonged to us, waiting patiently beneath the loud, artificial architecture of our fears and our defensive personas. We see now that the entire universe is an intertwined, living fabric that weaves itself in perfect harmony, and that we are an organic, inseparable strand within that magnificent design, requiring no structural combat to be worthy of our place. When we drop our threads and flatten our palms, we are not abandoning our lives to chaos. We are trusting the deep evolutionary current that has sustained us through every heartbeat, every breath, and every hidden transition of our lives. We understand that we possess an internal resilience that is fully capable of letting the world pass straight through us without causing a single internal fracture, meaning we no longer need to exhaust our precious life force by living in a state of permanent mobilization against imagined failures. We can walk through our modern, high-friction environments with a heart that is profoundly spacious yet entirely unshakable, responding to the challenges of our careers and relationships with absolute clarity, unclouded by the heavy baggage of secondary anticipation. As we prepare to transition from this quiet sanctuary of contemplation back into the active, moving theater of our daily modern lives, we carry this luminous stillness within our marrow, like an invisible, unyielding compass. We remember the ancient, timeless encouragement left to us by the teacher of teachers, who urged us to be islands unto ourselves, to be our own light, and to look for refuge nowhere but within the immediate raw reality of our own nature. We are reminded that the ultimate potential for liberation and absolute internal stillness does not belong to a distant era or a special class of ancient sages, but is a living, breathing reality encoded into the very mechanics of our present-day flesh and consciousness. The unedited events and daily uncertainties of our lives will continue to present themselves to us day after day, choice after choice, but we will never again mistake a passing shadow of worry for the baseline of our identity. We are the boundless, transparent space in which the entire tapestry is happening, completely free, completely whole, and completely at peace in our own unembellished skin, acting as a clear, sovereign field that allows the truth of the world to shine through without the need for any defensive threads. So let us stand at this final threshold of our shared journey, letting the quietness settle into the deepest recesses of our being, and ask ourselves this one essential question to carry into the waking world. As we step back into the relentless rush and unpredictable uncertainty of tomorrow, will we continue to weave the suffocating silk of our own fragmented traps, or will we finally have the courage to dismantle the loom, open our hands, and rest in the clear, unshakable sanctuary of our own unified presence?